if I make a kibble here and I process it very heavily, are there, for example, some carcinogens or some bad ingredients that get formed in the process?
Yeah, that's why I think why it's so important for us to create new studies that try to dissect what is caused by macronutrient and what is caused by processing. Because when you process foods with very high pressure and very high heat, you are actually producing a lot of these compounds that enter the body but offer no nutritional value because they're not able to be broken down. Heat causes very strong chemical bonds, and these, if there isn't a specific enzyme designed to break down that specific chemical bond, it's not going to be broken down. A lot of these types of compounds are like, well, how should I say? They are a product of combining sugars with protein and fats, or combining a fat with a protein. Basically, if you heat them up, they bind together and form a structure that has been associated with many chronic diseases and hence are termed carcinogen. But how the body deals with it is poorly understood. And so there's been inconclusive evidence of how carcinogenic these products are, although there has been an increased prevalence of cancer in dog populations around the world wherever kibble has become more and more popular.
Yeah, it's a correlation. It can be many things.
Yeah,
but
yeah. It's difficult to say because the body is very robust at keeping itself healthy, and so there might be ways for it to, for the dog's body to be able to handle with these very harmful substances. But then you also have to think about the question of chronic exposure and just how toxic these compounds are. For example, you can say that, okay, well, the body is prepared to deal with if you eat like this kibble food that has these conjugates of sugar and protein, these glycoprotein compounds and heterocycles and so forth, polyaromatic heterocycles, which have been associated with a lot of different types of cancer. But then you can say that, well, maybe it's not very toxic, but it's the fact that you're loading the system, the whole body, like twice a day for the whole dog's life with small amounts of these compounds, that it's very easy to draw the correlation between the incidence of cancer to the existence of these carcinogens. Yes.
Yeah, so like when there is a correlation and then there are quite clear possible mechanisms that definitely aren't good for you, then there might be something there.
Well, I think it merits further research, and I think that it merits definitely precaution, and that we should maybe as a society address this as just humbly, that we don't know the answers, but we see a clear correlation. So maybe we should address this as a possibility and not have the status quo be, well, they seem to be okay, so I guess it doesn't matter that much, even though we know better. But
yeah, and from the basic, like from the dog owner's perspective, I think the dog owner should be aware that there are foods like, for example, ultra-processed kibbles that do get processed in very high heat and very high temperature. They don't really advertise that.
No.
And I think the dog owner, like as a consumer, I should know what I'm buying. So I should know that there are very harsh processes being used, and there are being these, like for example, the PAH compounds formed that are somewhat non-carcinogens, for example, at least some of them, and that, for example, in the dog's body or in their genetics, there isn't an enzyme being formed to break those down really well. So it's probably not a good thing. We don't know if it's going to kill them or whatever, but we, like, that's something that the consumer should know about and then make their own guess or make their own choice. Nowadays, it's more like, okay, it's called dog food, so it's probably good for your dog. I think that's the consciousness level of the basic dog owner at this point. So okay, this is cheaper, I'll buy this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not too old, so I don't have enough expertise in saying like how trends have changed from a personal point of view over the years, but it definitely does seem that the idea of dog food is switching more into the interests of the dog and less into the interests of the owner. The owner's convenience is first and foremost for a dog food. I mean, it's very easy and very hassle-free to serve a kibble. And so the industry has noted that this, along with the manufacturing costs for kibble, allow it to be a very lucrative option. So it's, I think, very important to say that, like, or to note that we're actually now, as a society, even starting to consider of creating a diet for a dog that's in the interest of the health of the dog specifically.
Wow, that's a good point.
And not the, well, I mean, you know, there's like synthetic, there's like all these talks about like synthetic nylon, like hairs put into kibbles and stuff like that in order just to make the poop look nice and perfect when it comes out of the dog, so that the owner then doesn't have to deal with poop that isn't so nice. So it's nice and like the perfect poop shape, so that it can be picked up and taken into the trash.
Can I go to the pet market and buy that kind of kibble with the nylon hairs?
Yeah. I think that I'm no authority in. I haven't been looking for it, but there is definitely like one of the key goals for a dry food manufacturer, ultra processed food manufacturer, is definitely making it convenient for the owner, and that's so they talk a lot about stool quality, but then they also talk about how shiny the hair of the dog is. And how nice it is. Is it like an oily hair, or is it like, so there's that. So I mean, you definitely have those types of things as well as like energy levels of the dog. Maybe the dog is an energetic dog and you don't want it to be energetic because you live in a small apartment. So maybe we don't give it a diet that it's like feeling like super happy and energetic. So there's those types of things as well.
Okay, what do you think? I think Nick Thompson, in his lecture at the, I think, Numinen Old School, he had a lecture about, and he also talked about the perfect poop, 10 out of 10 poop. Yeah. He said that to bring out the best poop from the dog, you just give him high quality raw meat or something like that, whatever parts of the animal, and then you let them eat as much as they want. They might eat like almost half of their weight one day, and then they will fast. And then they will produce the perfect poop.
Yeah. So that's actually a really interesting point, and something that we are interested in, but it'll have to be in the future to study not only what the dog eats, but when the dog eats. Dog doesn't seem to be made for eating two similar-sized meals every day at exactly the same time. It seems that if you look at the genetics of a dog, if you look at its behavior and traits in the wild, then like with wild dogs, then it seems that they're actually able to go with many days quite readily without eating, and then that
and they don't mind.
Well, no, I mean they, like I said, in times of fasting, you switch from glucose like exclusively glucose breakdown to breaking down your own fat stores. That it seems that the dog, when in times of excess nutrition, is very readily available to store extra fat on its body. It can get fat quite easily. And then at the same time, when there isn't food available, it can switch over to using that fat for energy for many days at a time. And it's very readily available it's able to do that very readily.
Do you find that if you feed the dogs really high quality food, or is there research about that they voluntarily will fast sometimes? That sometimes it's like, oh no, my dog isn't eating anything, and it's actually okay.
Yeah, I've understood that there are certain breeds of dogs that are affected by this a lot more than other breeds. So some dog breeds are notorious for just eating all of the food that is presented in front of them, whereas other dogs are able to They're able to regulate this much easier. But like I said, there was a study showing what the dog prefers. The New Zealand study definitely showed that a dog was able to limit its calorie consumption over time, so that it ate more calories than it needed. The first time it was presented with an unlimited source of food, but then after a few days, it was like, okay, I get that there's an unlimited source of food, but something in my body is telling me I shouldn't eat it all. So they stop many hundreds of calories short of what they had been eating the first day.
Yeah. I guess it comes down to the macros also a lot.
Yeah.
On the human side, my experience or my belief, my strong belief throughout the years has been that when you just increase the micronutrient density, and you get a lot of all sorts of micronutrients, and you don't have too big bottlenecks in your micronutrients, like you don't have a zinc deficiency or you don't have a magnesium deficiency or anything like that, then you pretty much will get lean, almost without exception, even if you have unlimited food available. For example, with me, I mean, I used to weigh a little bit more, and then I found out about this concept of nutrient density, and then after that I haven't been able to get at least too much fat in my body, even no matter how much I try to eat. If I try to eat like in excess, then for the next week I will just like not want to eat that much. So it feels like my body and my appetite will regulate itself. But if I have huge deficiencies, then I will have huge cravings.
Yeah. So that's a term that's in the scientific community, it's referred to as nutritional starvation, where you have a starvation of a certain micronutrient, which is causing you to eat macronutrients at a disproportionate amount. And that seems to be, well, I think that that's a very, very interesting point of, or approach. For example, protein is the most satiating of the macronutrients. It seems to give the most strong signal, like hormonal signal to, well, both us humans and dogs, that we're full, and so we don't need to eat anymore. However, it's interesting that there's such a strong correlation with very protein-rich foods being nutrient-dense as well in micronutrients.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you can definitely posit that the micronutrients are causing or are allowing for nutritional starvation to be avoided. But then at the same time, it's also difficult to say if, well, you have a diet that's full of protein, which is satiating in itself, but then also protein is associated so strongly with other micronutrients.
Yeah, and it just so happens that when you increase the carbs, you usually increase the processing, you usually increase the very low nutrient density carbs. Like you don't, usually when you increase carbs, you don't increase blueberries. Yeah.
For sure. And in fact, if you look at the, how should I say, nutritional ingredient list, or the nutritional values for a kibble food, they don't actually include carbohydrates, and they...
That's true. I saw that,
Yeah. So that's interesting. There's actually a historic reason, and that's because they're not required in the... carbohydrates in general, they're not required in a dog diet.
Yeah, I was like, is this like a zero carb kibble or what?
Yeah. They hide it in the... Well, they don't hide it, but there's something called the NFE, which is the nitrogen-free extract, and that would be the extruded starch and carbohydrate that they include into it. And so the rationale being that since it's a carbohydrate, it doesn't include any nitrogen, so we can just call it the nitrogen-free part of the food. Okay. And so look for the NFE.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have some educating to do with this whole pet market thing.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Like the kibble diet it's the main ingredient is carbohydrate, but it actually isn't required to say whether it is. You kind of have to do the math of like, okay, well, if there's this much fat and there's that much protein and there's that much fiber and there's that much ash, then what's remaining is like 55% or something like that. There's like, well, that's kind of a lot. So but I mean, it's what else can it be? Because usually they also talk about moisture. It could be water, but I mean, usually they include moisture as well. So,
yeah. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that.
yeah, many unanswered questions, but we've already gotten some very interesting clues of where to research in the future.
Yeah, I think we had a nice 10-minute chat here.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, about the. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very interesting just to see that there is this kind of research nowadays going on. Like, this is the day I've been waiting for, because when I started finding about the things like there wasn't so much science to look into if I wanted to know about real foods. So now there's starting to be that kind of science. So it's very fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.